we were in the middle of chapter 10, and we already read the verse. We actually got until verse 20, but I want to reread from verse 17 because this becomes very significant and something we're going to see later on. So we discussed about Saul being a very modest fellow, and we're going to see that playing out even more now. So we have here verse 17, Samuel summoned the people to the Lord at Mizpah and said to them, thus said the Lord, the God of Israel, I brought Israel out of Egypt, and I delivered you from the hands of the Egyptians and of all the kingdoms that oppressed you. But today you have rejected your God, who delivered you from all your troubles and calamities. For you said, no, set up a king over us. Now station yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and clans. So first of all, we have here Samuel gathering all the nation together. And what we're going to see happening in the next verses that we're going to read will be a process of crowning Saul as king. But you can see already the way Samuel is addressing the nation that he is very unhappy with this idea of a king, and he is calling it a sin. In other words, for him, it is as if they have rejected God by insisting on a king, even though God himself said to him, no, listen to what they say and set up a king. So clearly you have a situation. Samuel is not at all happy. Okay, now what exactly happens? Samuel brought forward each of the tribes of Israel, and the lot indicated the tribe of Benjamin. What is happening here is we're using lots, and this reminds us very much of a very similar lot procedure, okay, that we saw in the book of Joshua, in Joshua chapter 7. What happens there? This is the first battle of the Ai, and it was a tremendous failure, and it's clear that there's been some kind of a sin, but nobody knows exactly what that sin is. So how do they find the sin? Let's look at Joshua 7, verse 16. Early next morning, Joshua and Israel come forward by tribes, and the tribe of Judah was indicated. He then had the clans of Judah come forward, and the clan of Zerach was indicated. Then he had the clan of Zerach come forward by ancestral houses, and Zabdi was indicated. Finally, he had his ancestral house come forward man by man, and Achan, son of Carmi, son of Zabdi, son of Zerach of the tribe of Judah, was indicated. Now, what you don't have here, we have the word of, it's very interesting because in our chapter 20, okay, at the end, verse 20, it says, and the lot indicated the tribe of Benjamin. The word lot doesn't really appear in the Hebrew, okay, as it does not appear in the Hebrew in Joshua 7. Actually, in the Hebrew, it's the identical wording, and the translation here is indicated, literally, I would say captured, okay? It was the tribe of Judah is captured, or in our chapter, the tribe of Benjamin is captured, okay? And there is this idea that there was some kind of lot, or it could have been something in using the breastplate of the high priest, but it was using something or other that was clearly divinely indicated, by which they were able to learn something they didn't know before. In the case of Joshua, it is to determine someone has sinned, someone has helped themselves to the spoils that were supposed to be not used at all. And via this process of indication, capturing, however you want to call it, lots, whatever it is you want to call it, we get to this fellow Achan, who is the one who indeed has sinned. Samuel is using the identical procedure in order to figure out who will be the king. Now, Samuel already knows who the king is. All right, he's already told. I mean, if you think about it, already in the beginning of chapter 10, Samuel has already anointed Saul as the king. And he said to him, Samuel took a flask of oil and poured some on Saul's head and kissed him and said, the Lord herewith anoints you ruler over his own people. And we also talked about the difference between ruler and king. So Samuel has already anointed Saul as this ruler, and now he is gathering everybody talking to them as if they have sinned, that this is a rejection, the fact they want a king. So Samuel still very much wants this ruler. He doesn't want the king. All right. But now he's going to go through this whole procedure so that it becomes clear that the person, although Samuel knows it's Saul because God spoke to him directly and told him it was Saul, but now he wants to use this process so that the nation themselves will see that Saul was the one who was actually selected by using this clearly divinely directed process of lots or whatever. So it goes through this whole thing, and we see that it talks about Benjamin, then it gets to the clan of Matri, and then it ends up with Saul. Okay, so they see then Saul is the one who was appointed, and what happens? But when they looked for him, he was not to be found. They inquired of the Lord again, has anyone else come here? And okay, so in other words, they're saying, okay, the God has made it known to us that it's Saul, but he's not around, so it must be a mistake. Are you sure, God, that's the right fella? And God says, oh no, yes, he is hiding among the baggage. Okay, hiding among the baggage. And this expression, by the way, I think I mentioned this before. This expression nechba el hakelim in Hebrew, hiding among the baggage, is become a popular expression in modern Hebrew to indicate somebody who is shy. Okay, and this is exactly describing the situation here. Of course, here's all of the nation, and he's been selected, and he's hiding. Okay, he's hiding. It's not for him, all this public stuff. Okay, so they ran over and brought him from there, and when he took his place among the people, he stood a head taller than everyone else. And Samuel said to the people, do you see the one whom the Lord has chosen? There is none like him among all the people. And all the people acclaimed him, shouting, long live the king. And there's nothing more direct than this whole story to tell us Samuel anointed him as a leader. Samuel then gathers all the people for a coronation, still accusing them, still hoping, the way I see it, you don't really want a king. And yet at the whole end of the process, what do they say? It is the nation who says, long live the king. No way that Samuel's going to get away with this. It is going to be king. It is not going to be just a ruler. Okay. Samuel expounded to the people the rules of the monarchy and recorded them in a document which he deposited before the Lord. Samuel then sent the people back to their homes. Okay. What is this rules of the monarchy? If we look at just past what we a few chapters ago, okay, let's see, where was it? Can't read my handwriting here. Sure. Okay, chapter 8, verse 11. Okay, this is where now you see, you get it again. The English is different. The Hebrew is the same. When you're reading the English, you're missing the connection here, okay? Mm-hmm. When the first time the conversation arises, when the nation comes to Samuel and demands a king, Samuel, of course, and we went through this already, tries to scare them, tries to tell them, you don't really want a king, because look at all these things that will happen. You'll be persecuted, you will be taken advantage of, etc. And he introduces that by saying in verse 11, now, my translation said this will be the practice of the king who will rule over you, but the actual word is mishpat hamelech. This is the rules of the king. Now, the understanding here is not the rules of the king, but that it is the way kings behave. He's not saying a king is commanded to take your children and make them, run his chariots or whatever, but he's saying this is what they do. And yet, in our chapter, in chapter 10, when in verse 25, it is exactly the same word, mishpat hamelech or mishpat hamelucha here. So you can ask here, the context is the rules of the king. He is clearly writing down what it is the king should and should not do. Let's say the laws of monarchy or whatever. However, by using the same word, we get this sense that Samuel, even though he's teaching them what are the rules of the monarchy, he is not happy because he sees this as being, this is going to be a slippery slope. This is going to end up being a king who takes advantage and goes through all the practices that Samuel had laid out for us in chapter 8. Okay, but for now, we don't see any sign of this because right now, the way we have met Saul, an incredibly modest person, someone who is very shy, someone who's running away from honor rather than embracing it. You know, it's almost as if he needs encouragement. He's a bit of a kick. Hey, guy, you're a king, you know, act it. And the last verses of this chapter of chapter 10 really bring that home. Saul also went home to Gibeah, accompanied by upstanding men whose hearts God had touched. He went home. He didn't build a palace. He didn't establish a capital. He went home. But some scoundrels said, how can this fellow save us? So they scorned him and brought him no gift, but he pretended not to mind. What do we already have here? We have here people who are looking at someone like Saul, who is modest, who is shy, who is going home, who is not looking for any of the trappings of monarchy. And they are looking at him with scorn as a result. He says, how can somebody like that? He's just an ordinary fellow. How can someone like that possibly reign? And the very fact that they are questioning his reign already tells us that there's a problem. Because for a monarch to be successful, he needs the respect and honor and obedience of the people. So already here we have a problem, and we have people who are not willing to accept his authority, but not because he is overly authoritarian, but the opposite, because he seems weak. He seems too ordinary. He doesn't seem to be looking for the trappings of monarchy. And so what we have there throughout chapter 10 there, and what we've basically been discussing the last few classes, is a constant tension between what kind of a ruler are we going to have? Are we going to have a king like kings of all other nations, which end up being authoritarian and take advantage of the people in many ways, very powerful? Or are we going to have somebody who is more a man of God, who is more modest, who is not looking for the trappings of monarchy, but just wants to do whatever the nation needs and get the job done? Is it possible to have a leader, an effective leader, who remains an ordinary man? Does that even work? Okay, and as we move now into chapter 11, we're going to see that this is definitely very much a part of what goes on, where the problems arise and what will be changing in the course of chapter 11. Okay, so when we start chapter 11, we immediately meet an enemy, Nachash, the Ammonite. So he's a king, Nachash, and we meet a few different Nachashes. Very often, different nations have kings that have the same name. There's a few Nachashes, there's a few Yavins, who king of Canaan. There's definitely a few pharaohs. And so it's very possible these are not actually personal names, but the name that is given to the ruler, you know. So they have this guy, the king of Ammonite. Okay, he marched up and besieged Yavesh Gilad. Where's Yavesh Gilad? It's up, it's north. It's on the eastern side of the Jordan River, and it's north. Okay, it's kind of opposite northern Samaria, if you want to picture it that way, even going up a bit into the Golan. So this is where he is, and so Nachash, the Ammonites come and they surround the city, Yavesh Gilad, which is a tribe of Manasseh. Remember, the tribe of Manasseh was split. Half of it is to the west of the Jordan, and half of it is to the east of the Jordan. And Gilead, anytime you have the name Gilead, that is going to be part of the half of the tribe of Manasseh, which is on the eastern side of the Jordan. So this is where we are. We're in a city called Yavesh Gilad, which is part of Gilead, which is part of Manasseh. And he goes this, and he surrounds them. And he says, "Look, you have a choice. I'll either kill you all, or you have to. Each person has to take out their right eye, gouge out their right eye. Can you imagine this? And this will be as a humiliation, basically as a way of saying, okay, you will be servants to me." Well, what a crazy choice that is. You know, I'll kill you or I'll gouge out your eye and let you live. in humiliation. So the elders of Yavesh Gilad really didn't know what to do. So they said, give us 7 days. We need to figure out what we're doing. And in the meantime, they sent messengers to all the rest of Israel to see if somebody would come to their aid. Okay? Now we're verse 4. When the messengers came to the Gibeah of Saul, or to the mountain of Saul, and again, this is where he went. Look at in verse 26 in the previous chapter, Saul went home to Gibeah. Okay, so what is Gibeah? It's where he lived. So the Gibeah where he lives, there's a few other Gibeahs. Okay. When the messengers came to Gibeah of Saul and gave this report in the hearing of the people, all the people broke into weeping. Because they're saying, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? Where's Saul? Saul was just coming from the field driving the cattle. Not only doesn't he have a palace, not only doesn't he have a capital, he's still shepherding his sheep and his cattle. He's a farmer. It's insane. Now, if you remember, there are a few other people who are farmers. We found very, very similar. It reminds me very, very much this vision of Saul coming from his farming. We see a very similar thing with Elisha. When Elijah is going to go and find Elisha, and he's in the process of handing it over to him. Where does he find him? Also the exact same thing. He's driving the cattle of his parents. Okay. And I love this image because in both of them, it tells us these are not people who are seeking power. These are just ordinary people that are farming. Now, we also have a similar kind of situation with Gideon. Gideon is what he's threshing. Okay, he's threshing when the angel finds him. And again, you have this idea of someone who's not looking to be a prophet or a judge or anything. In many ways, I think this also tells us that Saul in his own behavior actually is not behaving like a king. He is behaving much more in line with a judge, or more in line with the kind of ruler that Samuel has in mind. Okay, but here becomes his moment of test. You know, how is he going to function in this kind of situation? Part of the nation, this one city in the north, is being threatened by a powerful enemy. What is going to happen? So in verse 6, when he heard these things, the Spirit of God gripped Saul, and his anger blazed up. Okay, there's a Spirit of God that comes up upon him, and that also propels him to action. Now, what does he do? He takes a pair of cattle, divides them up, and sends them all over the country with a message. Okay, whoever, this shall be done to the cattle of anyone who does not follow Saul and Samuel into battle. So what does this remind us of? You may remember that we had the story at the end of the book of Judges of the concubine of Gibeah. And after that whole story, this young woman was raped and murdered by people in the tribe of Benjamin. Okay. What the husband does is he divides up her body, sends it all over the country with a message, which becomes a call to war, a call to civil war. And here Saul does the very same thing, but not with a human body, with cattle. Okay. But it's the same kind of very gory, very bloody, very graphic kind of a message that's a threatening message. Okay, you guys better come or else we're going to destroy all your cattle. And they come. Now, there's some very interesting things. I think there's a lot in this chapter, in this story that we're dealing with now, that harkens back to that same story of the concubine from Gibeah. So first of all, as I talked about here, carving up this and sending it as messages, okay? But where does Saul live? He lives in Gibeah. Now, it may be the same Gibeah or it may not be, because this one says it's the Gibeah of Saul, but it's clearly the same name, okay? Which it just echoes. But there's a far more significant connection here, a very practical, significant connection. Who are the people of Yavesh Gilad, and where have we met them before? We met them before in that story of the concubine of Gibeah. So let's go back to the book of Judges, verse 21. Chapter 21. Chapter 21, verse 8. What has happened? Okay. What has happened is that they finished the civil war. They've gathered in Shiloh. They're trying to figure out, okay, what do we do next? And actually, they're not in Shiloh, excuse me. They're in Beit El at this point. And they suddenly realize that they have decimated entire tribe. There are exactly 600 men left in Benjamin. That's it. Okay. And so they're saying, well, they took an oath, all of them, as part of the Civil War, that no man will give his daughter to a man from Benjamin. So we have 600 Benjamites left, no women, no children. How are they going to get married and continue the tribe if no one will give their daughters to them? The first solution that they come up with are the women of Yavesh Gilad. What happened in Yavesh Gilad? And I won't read this, but I'll just tell you this is where it is if you want to go back later on and read it in chapter 21. What had happened was as follows. At the point at which the people of Israel sent the pieces of that woman with a message, gather together, we're going to civil war against Benjamin, the people of Yavesh Gilad, again, the tribe of Manasseh, up there in the north, on the east part, on the north, refused to come. And so what happened was the rest of Israel slaughtered the people of Yavesh Gilad. They slaughtered all of the men and they slaughtered all the women who were not virgins. There were remaining 400 women who were not virgins. Everybody else in Yavesh Gilad at that point were murdered. And so one of the solutions was of the 600 Benjamites who were left, 400 were married, these 400 virgins from Yavesh Gilad. Okay? The other 200 get married through the festival of grapes in Shiloh, but that's a separate story. What does that mean? Number one, that there's a particular kinship. I mean, remember, Benjamin, Saul's tribe has been the subject of a civil war some generations before, but not that many years before, okay? And they have, so who stood with Benjamin? Yavesh Gilad. Who paid the price? Yavesh Gilad. And what was the result? 400 women of Yavesh Gilad married men from Benjamin, which means Saul not only feels a particular sense of loyalty to Yavesh Gilad, but they're related. Because almost 4 out of 6, 2/3 of the tribe of Benjamin, now that Saul is part of the tribe, the people of his generation, 2/3 of his generation are descendants from women from Yavesh Gilad. These are their relatives. So you could see he feels particularly moved to help him, and the way he calls everyone to battle is using the very same technique that was used then by the nation of Israel to fight against Benjamin. It's kind of bringing us full circle. Now Benjamin is using the very same tactics to get everybody united together to go and protect Yavesh Gilad. But what's very interesting is in this case, whereas in the previous case, it was a civil war to revenge a terrible thing, but at the end of the day, it was an unconscionable action to murder all of Benjamin because of what a few people in Benjamin did. Saul here is doing this not to murder a tribe, but to save a city in Israel. So it's all connected, but in a way, it's a correction. It is a whole different type of situation that is going up. And Saul there is the person to make this correction, to make this repair in many ways. Okay. So the other thing I want you to notice is in verse 7, when he calls out to Israel about following him, he says, following Saul and Samuel. So Saul here sees himself very much as, we know in verse 6, he has the Spirit of the Lord upon him. Very important that it's with him and Samuel together. He is not going to go to battle without the man of the Lord with him, without Samuel, the local prophet. He is maybe the general, but he sees that part of the success in the war is that the prophet is with him. And that was also, I think, very indicative of who Saul is at this point. So he's stepping up. He's no longer, he left the cows in the pasture. He has no longer hiding behind the baggage. Okay, he's stepping up as a king. He's going to lead the nation into battle, but he's still coming from a place of loyalty, from a place of fearing God, and the desire and the need to have the prophet with him. Okay, and then we go, and of course, they end up going to battle, and they have an amazing victory. And of course, they save the people of Yavesh Gilad. Okay, and that takes us to verse 12, when all of a sudden we have a different kind of a statement. The people then said to Samuel, "Who was it said shall Saul be king over us? Hand the men over, and we'll put them to death." What is he referring to? He's referring to the statement of those scoundrels that we saw in verse 27 at the end of chapter 10. Those people who scorned him and say, "How can this fellow save him?" Okay, and it's the same, the people that this is who they're referring to. When do they say it? They don't say it at the time. Saul ignores them. The nation has there's no one that stands up at the end of chapter 10 and says, "Now, wait a second. Fellows, this is not right. Samuel God has clearly chosen Saul. You don't shame him. You treat him with respect. You accept him as your king." Nobody in the nation stood up to defend Saul at that point. You had this small group of people who really did not accept him and questioned his authority. Most of the people basically stood back and say, "Okay, let's see. He may end up good. He may end up not so good. We're going to wait and see." Well, the wait and see has now come to an end. When they see how Saul successfully pushed forward this campaign, rescued a beleaguered city in the tribe of Manasseh up in the north, then, of course, they've already made the decision. Saul, of course, is the king. And their immediate reaction is to say, all those guys who questioned his authority then, we have to put them to death, which is a little bit cheap, okay? Because if they were so upset with what he had said, they should have said it then in chapter 10, not now. Now it's easy, okay? And Saul indeed is very, very noble. He said, "No man shall be put to death this day, for this day the Lord has brought victory to Israel." He is noble. He understands these people were grumbling then, but his assumption is that in the same way the people who were neutral have come around and really rallied to him in a big way, okay? He's assuming that also those people realized that they were wrong in what they said, because Saul was able to prove that he is a very effective king. And then what happens, and this is in verse 14. Samuel said to the people, "Come, let us go to Gilgal and there inaugurate the monarchy." So all the people went to Gilgal, and there at Gilgal they declared Saul king before the Lord. They offered sacrifices of well-being there before the Lord, and Saul and all the men of Israel held a great celebration there. Classic question. What is going on in verse 14 when we already had at the end of chapter 10 a procedure of crowning Saul king that ends in verse 24, chapter 10, verse 24. "There's not like him among the people. All the people claimed him, shouting, 'Long live the king.'" That's a coronation. This is a coronation. Why do we need a second coronation? So I think what happens at the second time is that the doubts both of Samuel and of the people have been resolved. Samuel himself, I think, this is my interpretation, Samuel himself understands that, number one, Saul is the right person. He is not arrogant. He's not looking for the trappings of monarchy, but yet the way he responds to the threat from the Ammonites and leads battle and does it in a way that is not a judge who comes and goes, does the battle and leaves, but he's there as somebody who's created confidence in the nation, so that the nation are saying, "Of course, Saul is our king. Wonderful. He has saved us." At that point, Samuel himself reconciles himself to the idea of the king. And so when he says, "Let's go," and it's actually interesting because in Hebrew, it says here, inaugurate the monarchy. In Hebrew is renew or make it new, the monarchy. It's almost as if we're starting fresh. Okay, we're going to start fresh this time, because the last time there were too many misgivings. Samuel had misgivings, the nation had misgivings. Now is a time to really do a coronation, okay, when we are all very united in our confidence that Saul's the right man and a king is a good thing. The other thing is that it's a very different kind of a ceremony. First of all, keep in mind that the actual anointing of Saul was done quietly. Nobody was around. That was the beginning of chapter 10. And then what we had at the end of chapter 10 was merely a system of selection, which is done so that the nation will have confidence that indeed it is Saul who is chosen of God. But there is other than the cheer, long live the king, there is no actual ceremony. What happens in the Gilgal? They bring sacrifices. It is a celebration. In the biblical times, there is no real celebration without sacrifices. So they brought celebration, and we have joy, celebration. This is the real coronation. This is the time when everybody is not only at peace with this idea of Saul being the king and accepting him, but they're also celebrating in a full way. Now, there are commentaries who have noticed that initially in chapter 10, verse 8, as part of Samuel's instruction to Saul, and he tells him, you're going to go and you're going to, remember we talked about all these different signs. You're going to meet this one. He's going to tell you this. He's going to meet that one. He's going to tell you that. And after all that, what does Samuel say to Saul in verse 17? No, that's not what I was looking for. Wait, I'm looking. Excuse me, I'm in the wrong chapter. Yeah, okay. Here we go. In verse 8, chapter 10, verse 8. First, let's start with chapter 7. And once these signs have happened to you, act when the occasion rises, for God is with you. After that, you are to go down to Gilgal ahead of me, and I will come down to you to present burnt offerings and offer sacrifices of well-being. Wait 7 days until I come to you and instruct you what you are to do next. This never happened. He saw those people. The signs all came true. He meets his uncle, and then that's it. They go home. In verse 17, it is when Samuel then gathers everybody, not at Gilgal, at the Mitzvah. So there are people who notice this and they say, Saul did the wrong thing. Samuel said, see all these signs, all these people are going to give you encouragement or give you an indication that indeed this is of God. Then go to Gilgal and wait for me there for 7 days, and then we're going to come and have all these sacrifices. And he didn't do that. This indicates to me that not only is Samuel ambivalent about him being a king, and the nation ambivalent about him being a king, but Saul himself was ambivalent about it being king. He's like running away. No, I don't need this. And it's consistent with his hiding with the baggage. When Samuel is the one who has to call the meeting, and he doesn't call the meeting in Gilgal. Why? Samuel himself probably realizes we're not ready for the Gilgal yet. Gilgal is the real big deal. They're doing it in a very, half official, half unofficial kind of way. And I think now we come back to the Gilgal in verse 14 at the end of chapter 11. We see that this needed to happen. This was the original plan, but everybody had to resolve their ambivalences before they could get here. Samuel, Saul, and the nation. All that gets put together through the occurrences, particularly this war against, on behalf of Yavesh Gilead, against the Ammonites, and then we are ready to have that. So we now come here, the end of chapter 11, everything seems great. We have a wonderful king. He's righteous, he's modest, he's capable, and he has truly been crowned by the entire nation. Everybody is confident in his abilities and are willing and happy to accept his authority. That's it for today. Any questions or comments? Turn on your mics.
That's fantastic.
Sondra, have you any idea as to how Saul was captured or selected? What was the means of select? How did it happen? Okay,
so what we have, it's an assumption that some kind of a lottery kind of thing, which is really what also happened with Achan. And again, it may have been combined with the breastplate. What does the breastplate have? The names of the tribes. Okay,
The human
so it could be
family?
that it lit up the tribe of Benjamin. Okay, and then it could be that there were these pieces of paper. All the families of Benjamin, the clans of Benjamin, are put in, and then they pull out a piece of paper, and it shows his clan, and then they have all the various men of that clan, and they pull up the paper, and it's Saul. That is the idea of a lottery. But it's very clear that it is a lottery. We have also a lottery in the book of Numbers, in the division of the division of part of the land of Israel that already takes place in the book of Numbers. That is also done with some kind of a lottery. So, and also I think part of that is also happens in Joshua. So these kinds of lotteries are clearly seen as a way of God sending a message. It's not chance by any means. It's seen as a miraculous system by which God is able to indicate to the nation who is the person. And it's very interesting because in the case of Saul, God sends this message two different ways. He sends the message to Samuel. So you might ask, why isn't that good enough? Why can't Samuel stand in front of the nation and says, "So saith the Lord, take the man Saul, the son of Kish from the tribe of Benjamin, and anoint him as king"? Samuel doesn't do that. God doesn't appoint him. And we know why. Because the very fact that the nation have come to Samuel demanding a king, okay? Samuel realizes just right away, what does he say? He says, "What have I done to hurt you? I never took anything from you. I never took advantage of you." Okay? Samuel himself understands right away that demanding of the king is both an attack on his capability and authority and attack on God. Okay? And it is for that reason that God needs to send his message in a way that the whole nation can see it and not just believe what Samuel has said to them. And so I think that's what this whole procedure is about. It's it's a whole ceremony that the whole nation can see this is how he was chosen.
Sondra, there's a
Yes.
common thread about our leaders chosen by God. If you look at Moses' life, he was take caring of the sheep. David was take caring of the sheep. Saul, it's like they have this character of taking care of others.
Absolutely. And we see that, and there's something very special about this. Of course, all of this changes once, Saul's children do not become king because of Saul's sins. And we're, of course, going to see that as we continue the study. So David is appointed again a nobody, okay? But from David, we have a hereditary dynasty. And that already is where things begin to fall apart. Because the people who become king are all princes in the tribe of Judah. That's a little different in the up northern kingdom because we have a number of different dynasties. There's some dynasties, and then there's a bloody overthrow or whatever, and somebody else comes in. That whole thing is very different. But that's a huge change. The person who is selected out of nowhere, who tends to be a farmer, a shepherd, or whatever, and then all of a sudden, when the next king becomes a prince, you lose that whole element of the ordinary man who becomes king.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
In chapter 10, verse 9, isn't
Mhm.
8 and 9? It was interesting. You said that Saul went back home. But in verse 9, it says, when he turned his back to go from Samuel, God gave him another heart. So was he going back home because he wanted to, or because God made him?
No, well, this is two different things, okay? He does go home, but this is before he's about to start this journey, okay? And he goes to a number of different places. Each place he's encountering people who say or do things exactly as Samuel had predicted would happen. So each of these encounters actually serve as signs that what Samuel has told him is true. And that's what Samuel says to him. These things are going to happen. And once it happens, you'll see. And so that starts in verse 9, where it says all those signs were fulfilled that same day. Okay, and then we come and have an actual description of the final sign. Okay, but yes, he is at that point, he's in Gibeah, but that is something he's supposed to do. In other words, he's supposed to end up with that last sign. The question is, though, in verse 8, it says, then from there go to Gilgal.
So why
But he
did
doesn't.
Samuel say that? Why did Samuel say that? And if God was going to come in and say, but he needs to go and do these other things.
No. It's on the way. In other words,
Okay.
if you look back in chapter 10, okay, so he says as follows, starting with verse 2, when you leave me today, you will meet 2 men near the tomb of Rachel, blah, 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 blah. They will tell you, etc. Okay. Then on verse 3, you shall pass on from there until you come to the terebinth of Tabor. There you'll be met by 3 men, blah, blah, blah. Then on verse 5, after that, you are to go on to the hill of God, which we said is Kiryat Yearim, where the ark is staying. Okay, and there as you enter the town, you encounter a band of prophets, Spirit of the Lord. Once these signs have happened to you, for God is with, after that, you are to go down to Gilgal. Okay, what we then have is he turned to leave. Okay, that's in verse 9, 10. He then goes to the hill. Okay, now here, again, you have the word Giv'ah, the hill, but we had earlier the hill of the Lord in verse 5. So the assumption is that this hill is where he was supposed to go, not Giv'ah where he lives. The Givat Elohim, the hill of the Lord, which is where the ark is, and that's exactly what happened. Okay, and we have, this is the third sign. Okay, and then he encounters his uncle. Yeah. Okay, and that's it. And then he disappears at that point. The assumption is he goes home after that, because that's the end of the story. And it's then that Samuel gathers them all in Mitzpah.
Okay.
What was it that was actually meant, though, when it says that God transformed him with a new heart? What was the purpose? I mean, what was it?
In which verse? In verse 10?
That was verse 9.
Mm.
So what does that actually mean?
He gave him a new heart. He gave him a heart to well, it kind of goes, if you ask me, with what happens in verse 10, where the Spirit of the Lord goes upon him and he begins to prophesy. So it seems to me that there's a transformation that Saul goes to turn him from an ordinary person who's righteous to a person who has that extra something.
To have a prophetic gift, in other words.
Prophetic gift, but it's also something that's supposed to allow him to be a righteous king, not just a righteous guy, So that's how I would read that. Okay. So have a great rest of the week, and hopefully we'll see you again next week as we continue. Next week we will continue with chapter 12.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed that film. And we have lots more film content and emails and articles that I'm sure you will enjoy as well. Check out our website at CFOIC.com and subscribe to our newsletter. You can do that right from the homepage. I know you will really enjoy the content that will land in your inbox on a regular basis. Hope to see you soon.